Thank you, Ruth. Good afternoon. Thank you for checking in. We have a lot of um, audience here, and I'm gonna share screen. It's 2:05, so we have about 30 minutes to really share um, the information that we have regarding this special population. And I have to admit, for those of you who know me, you know I don't have any knowledge about special education. So I am just here for the aesthetic purpose of being just a model and just look cute. I am just kidding. I am going to share my screen and really share something about why I chose this title. From fear to practice, practical support for neurodiverse students. And first of all, I wanted to see if you guys can hear me well with this new microphone. I am using a new Bluetooth that I purchased just for this presentation. Everything is okay? Thumbs up if you guys can hear me clearly. Thank you. So, if I can move this presentation from fear to practice, and I use Sesame Street as my background because ever since I was little, even though I grew up in the Philippines, even if I didn't understand a word from Sesame Street while they're speaking English, it was my foundation of my learning. And I give props to them because and I think it's 2017 that they introduced Julia, a student in Sesame Street who is the spectrum. From fear, I started teaching the classroom in 1997. I was a young teacher teaching AP calculus. And so you can tell the fear in my eyes because how do I teach students when I was a I'm not gonna tell you my age because you guys are gonna calculate and you're gonna say, oh my God, she's 100 years old. But the fear that I have of being able to manage the classroom, right? And being able to pass 20 kids through their AP calculus journey is one. One is how do I deliver the curriculum with different learning styles, including practical support and supporting this specific population. What we'll cover in going through this is that we are not going to touch upon the theory. Enough of the theories, right? What can you do tomorrow in your classroom? Tomorrow, Friday, what can you do with the student who's acting up? Tomorrow, who's looking away in the window? Are they bored? Are they not learning? Are we not reaching them in the capacity where they can learn within that 50 minutes or an hour? Who are the students you'll be serving? How do you reach every learner, and how do you maintain a positive classroom for all? First, we have the common disabilities, the instructional strategies, the behavior management, and the key takeaways. At the end of this uh, module, we are going to have two case studies that we're going to talk about based on the population of our audience. I think we're going to talk about the first case study, which is in the classroom. My background is in CTE, career tech education, and the second case study is about workforce, neurodiverse employees. And I think, but based on the audience, I think we're gonna lean more in the classroom. And please put in the chat if you guys want to talk more about workforce or in the classroom, and we'll pick what case study because it's already 2:10 and we only have 30 minutes to provide you the information. Lastly, I'm gonna talk about why are we doing this? Why are we starting this conversation from kinder, from first grade to high school to community college and to workforce? I actually believe everything leads to workforce. Whether you're teaching them how to read, whether you're teaching them how to do math, or whether you're teaching them AP calculus in high school, whatever you're teaching them, business, construction, concentrator, capstone, teaching them how to dance, everything leads to workforce. So how does this affect and connect everything at the end of their education journey? I'm going to introduce to you and pass it along to Mr. Jaime Onate, who will be the source of all information. And I will stop talking because we're running out of time. Jaime.
All right. Hi, everyone. You guys can hear me, correct? Okay. So first off, I'm not that well of a presenter, so I'm going to do my best. I've wrote notes for myself. Um, I know this is a topic of accommodations, and this is one accommodation I use for myself. So pre-written notes. Thank you for coming to this presentation. Um, like I said, I'm not a natural presenter, but I do love talking about SPED, and I love talking about like human compassion and empathy, which is something is I think super important when it comes to teaching or just to being a good human being. Um, I want to preface this with there's different philosophies within education. I'm going to present you mine. It's not to say it's the correct one. It's the my philosophy. And then also there's different districts all around Southern California, the US. Everyone does something differently. So with those prefaces in mind, but there are best practices that we typically say. Um, Throughout this presentation, I do want to commonly tie a couple of themes together. Just, cultivating patience, empathy, understanding, and curiosity. So I truly believe there is no bad student. It's just maladaptive behavior, behavior that's not suited to them and what they're trying to communicate. There should be accountability, but accountability with empathy and non-judgment. Another thing I want to state, and a lot of this is geared towards supporting students within the general education environment, that inclusion is very powerful. I believe in inclusion. It's not only teaching students academics, those who, might have learning disabilities, but it's also teaching stronger empathy, perspective taking, understanding differences, and neurodiversity. Also allows students to create a more flexible communication skills and again provides different, more broad solutions. Another thing that you'll hear me continuously bring up, I have a learning disability myself, so does my sister, but we took two different paths. So I know a lot of individuals with dyslexia, something I have, we see things differently than other people do. And people with on the spectrum or with ADHD or some other neurodiversity, they're going to see the world in a different way, and it allows us to better get a view of different perspectives. It's very helpful. I also want to say that I respect teachers so much because you guys are the front line to a lot of things, knowing, if a student's meeting their developmental milestones, if they're where they should be. Also, when it comes to social emotional, every year at my school, I do a presentation, not a fun presentation on suicidal ideation, but it's something that's super important, and teachers are typically the first ones to notice signs of that. Um, I was not told that I had dyslexia until college. So awareness is very important. The more you guys are aware and understand, these disabilities, and the earlier it's catch, the life, better outcome for the individual, I believe, can occur, especially with early intervention. So in this slide, there's 13 categories in which students can qualify for special education under IDEA. One of the most common ones is specific learning disability or learning disabilities. Here we have dyslexia, which a lot of people know, dysgraphia. Dyslexia, difficulty with reading, decoding words, spelling. Dysgraphia is, difficulty with written expression, handwriting. Dyscalculia has to do with math, and there's other processing disorders. So, like I indicated, in different districts, we would qualify students for learning disability in different ways. In my district, we use it's called a model of patterns of strengths and weaknesses, and there's 14 different processing areas that we say. It's a lot. I won't go into depth into it, but for example, a student can have short-term memory. But what type of short-term memory deficit could it be? Could it be auditory? Could it be visual? Different things are broken down more. So, and a lot of these individuals with learning disabilities are typically average cognitive ability or above. It's just that they process information differently than a neurotypical person would. But what comes with that are strengths. An example like I gave you, both me and my sister have very similar profiles, both dyslexia, a little bit of ADHD. she ultimately had an IEP. I did not have an IEP. And there's a lot of intangibles that we can't account for. There's a saying in special education, disability does not equate to eligibility. So just because you have a disability, whatever it may be, doesn't mean you're eligible for special education. There has to be a need for special education. So I didn't have a need, but I overcompensated with hard work ethic, resilience, and grit. My sister might have not had those, but we had similar things. And when it came to dyslexia, different paths, and that's okay. Um, that's one thing IEPs are meant to do, to help support students, let them learn about their learning difficulties, to use their strengths to accommodate for those difficulties and teach them these strategies. So once they leave us at 18, 22, they're ready for the world after. Next slide, please. So two other common areas of eligibility or disabilities are ADHD and autism spectrum disorder. I'll touch on ADHD first. That would fall under the category of other health impairment. Typically, a lot of individuals know it as ADD in the past, but now it's ADHD with either inattentive or hyperactive type or combined both. Um, they say 1 out of 9 children between the ages of 3 and 17 are diagnosed with ADHD. So those are the only ones diagnosed per the CDC. There's a lot of others who are not diagnosed and might be labeled by teachers or culturally as lazy, just bad students. But, neurologically, their brain works differently. Um, And what I'm seeing now, I work a lot at the high school level. That's my main site. There's a lot of environmental, ADHD-like characteristics due to, technology and other aspects of, our culture right now. And definitely the neurological. One way to figure out which one it might be is looking through the history of the student. But it's very interesting. It, Considering the cultural aspects, environmental with what we have with apps and technology, and just it's geared towards targeting our dopamine system. That's one thing that's associated with ADHD. Their brains are different in the sense of how it uses dopamine. So that involves motivation, attention, reward, and focus. It's a fallacy or it's a myth that students with ADHD can't focus at all. They can actually hyper focus. They're able to focus. It's just in what they're interested in. If they're not interested, that dopamine reward system isn't good. It's far harder to get them to focus. But if you get an area that they're very interested in, they can hyper focus. Um, as an educator, I cannot diagnose as a school psychologist. That is usually through the DSM. I can only say individuals have ADHD-like characteristics or say autism-like characteristics, and that's how they qualify under the 13 categories, which to explain that would be another presentation. If you turn on to the next slide, please.
Jaime, before we move on to the
Yeah.
next slide, can you provide, if it's a third grader and I have a student, right? How can I tell that the student has ADHD or just a student that's trying to get attention,
Yeah.
trying to watch TikTok, trying to get out and play with their friends outside by nutrition,
Yeah.
right? So those are two distinctive students that I, as a new teacher, wouldn't be able to tell if this kid needs more attention or just a kid that really just is bored and wanted to
Yeah.
play by the
So,
bell ring.
okay. And this is
Just
where
give me one
Yeah,
example
yeah.
of
This
the
is
difference.
where I used to work at the elementary level, and this is where philosophies, my philosophy. Ultimately, for a student to qualify for services, they only have to have characteristics. I don't need a formal diagnosis. So if it
Ah,
is more of an environmental sense, I can still qualify that student under that category of other health impairment because they're exhibiting characteristics that are associated with ADHD. Ultimately, as educators, we want to support the students because they have that need for support, regardless if they have that diagnosis, right? If we see a greater need and they share a lot of those characteristics, we want to support them. And definitely, if they're behind in their standards and progress or grades, and they're exhibiting those characteristics, it would be important to work through the process to see if they would qualify for an IEP. Um, but there,
Got it.
and I'll go over this. There's a lot of different ways through different tiers of different tiers of how we can support students prior to reaching that, um, you know, process for an IEP or say a 504. Okay. And I want to preface that a lot of these areas, like you can do a presentation alone on ADHD that could take 2 hours, autism 2 hours. I apologize. I wish I can provide with as many answers as I could for all these categories, but I'm general overview of these. So for autism, it's a deficit in communication, socialization. Individuals on the spectrum may have repetitive movements, hard time adapting to changes, and sensory issues. These are the common characteristics that are shown for students on the spectrum. And again, it's a spectrum, not one student. And I would say this for every neurodiversity, like even for ADHD or for specific learning disability or for intellectual disability, there's a spectrum of individuals. Everyone's different. That's why in IEP, it's individualized education plan. Once a student qualifies under these one categories, their plan is geared toward their individual needs, not their category. But for autism, there it it does look different among everyone. More so also boys versus girls. It's more apparent that's boys are typically more diagnosed with autism. There's a lot of theories that may be tied to social norms on why, girls are better able to mask their autism. Um, and then again, a large part of the deficits is in functional communication, so verbal, nonverbal, and socialization. A lot of time, what I see is students on the spectrum might usually qualify for speech services first to address those communication concerns, particularly in pragmatics. Um, and as they move along, it might be easier to identify more characteristics, and they ultimately qualify under the category of autism. I know a lot of you are becoming teachers. I think the child development class is really important, understanding milestones, because you get a lot of parents, especially if you work in a low SES area, who might not know about milestones. Excuse me.
Mr.
So,
Oñate, what's
yeah,
SES?
socioeconomic status. So in lower
I
income
know, I'm
areas,
just trying to
yeah.
clear
Thank
things
you. No,
up.
thank you. There's a lot of acronyms in special education I forget. To those others who don't know what the acronyms are. Um, but yeah, they it's going to be harder for parents to know, like, oh, they should have spoke, their words by a certain age or sentences by a certain age, or even um, walking, toilet, training, all those things. There's milestones, and it's important to know that when you're talking to parents, like, and then discussing it with team members, because again, you guys are the first line. One thing I found interesting is I had a friend ask me, what's the difference between someone on the spectrum and someone who's just shy? There's a lot that's different, right? But one interesting thing neurologically on how their brain works, like even if they want to be social, it's hard for them to be social. One thing that's in the way their brain works, and I saw a study on this, is their eye gaze. A lot of us, their eye gaze is different from someone who's neurotypical. They'll spend less time fixating on the eye region and more so on the mouth or non-social stimuli, like shapes, compared to neurotypical peers. So a lot of things that we subconsciously process, especially socially, social cues, it's hard for them to do. Um, so again, it's this trying to have empathy, deeper understanding, curiosity to learn more about the students on the spectrum or any other learning disability. I think that really supports teachers within the classroom. Um, Next page.
My mouse is not cooperating, sorry.
And then there's other categories too that I thought I'd cover. Intellectual disability is another category. Emotional disability is one that I see more often within the high school um, setting, and definitely we saw a lot after COVID. Then there's speech or language impairment, like indicated or stated earlier. You see this more within the elementary level. And one thing I'd like to point out is, again, knowing these milestones. Commonly, I'd get concerned parents in first or second grade telling me they think their kiddo has dyslexia because they're reversing B and D or P and Q. But again, learning these like age appropriate behaviors, especially if you talk to the experts in this, like the speech pathologists, that's typical until sometimes age 7, age 8. It doesn't mean they may have dyslexia, right? But it's using your team and collaborating and communication is super important when it comes, especially at all levels, but very important in the elementary level. Um, Also, when going about, if you think a student might have a learning disability or some sort of neurodivergence that they may need extra support through an IEP or a 504, is requesting, they're called student support team meetings or STEP meets team meetings. So student or support team education plan. These are meetings, they're labeled differently in different districts. This is how they're labeled in mine. It's typically made up of a teacher, school psychologist, admin, counselor, and it's just problem solving on how to support the student. After some time, if time has passed and the student's not progressing, you reconvene, try other supports, or maybe move on to the process of an IEP or a 504 plan.
You want next
Um,
slide?
yes. So okay, one way I see, and I see this practice by a lot of the best teachers I've worked with, is they provide accommodations not just for those students who need it or the students who have an IEP or a 504, but they provide accommodations for all students. And universal design for learning. So there's different ways you can do this. Representation, how the info is presented, engagement, the motivation, interest, or self-regulation of the student and then actions and expressions, how they can show you they've learned the content.
You know, before we move on to the next slide, we talk about representation and how information is presented. Now that we are moving into more of asynchronous, asynchronous modules, especially in the community college and college levels, so a lot of our classroom settings are hybrid. And so if we have students, neurodiverse students in a Zoom, how do we facilitate and provide accommodations and modifications if it's in virtual setting, not in classroom one-on-one? How we can, the eye contact is not there. And so how is the info presented when we're very limited as teachers, especially for new teachers? Do you have any suggestions on how to do it in Zoom?
Yeah, a lot of the accommodations you can provide within the classroom can also be provided through Zoom. There are going to be some different methods in way you can provide. So some that might be applied, if it's through online teaching, which a lot of teachers already do, is providing, recorded lessons, um, providing material prior to the class so that they can front load. Um, and then when it comes to testing or assignments, allowing additional time, allowing provide like approved notes, and I'll go over ones that are provided in class, and I can mention ones that can be provided via online teaching.
Got it. You.
So, well, yeah. One thing I do want to differentiate is accommodations versus modifications. So accommodations can be done for all students, but you can only modify the curriculum for students on IEP typically. Um, Accommodations don't only have to be provided like I stated to a student who has an IEP plan or a 504. You can provide accommodations for all kiddos. But modifications would be changing the standards that you typically as a teacher would have to follow. But again, that's through the IEP process. At the high school level, that might look like a pull-out class or a smaller contained class, which less students and the curriculum is provided or taught at a slower pace. You might modify it by having the student to do, you know, less test um, testing items, or modifying work, so they're better able to, it's at their level.
Next slide.
Mhm. So another thing I want to differentiate is the difference between an IEP and a 504. They're both legal documents under different laws. IDEA for special education, so Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, and then a 504 is a civil rights law. So um, for students' eligibility for an IEP, they have to be assessed either, you know, within the school setting, typically by a school psychologist, also by a speech pathologist. They can qualify alone for speech and language services. There's also other service providers. For a 504 plan, it's different from district to district. Typically, you have to have a medical documentation of disability substantially impacting the student in a major life activity. Examples of this would be ADHD, anxiety, depression, diabetes. Um, and the way I differentiate, and I had a meeting today for that, a student who might need an IEP versus a 504 is a 504, we see um, a student would be able to succeed just with accommodations alone. But when we need that more supportive setting or modification, typically we would recommend an IEP. And sometimes we do put a student under a 504 first, and if they're still struggling, we move to an IEP. Um, with an IEP, you have a case carrier, you have a team, you have goals, specialized instruction and services. With a 504, you do have annual meetings, but there's not one sort of like case carrier, at least within my district. With an IEP, you also meet annually and triannually to be for the student to be reassessed. IEP applies from K to 12. So does a 504, but also within the workplace. That's where the 504 is different. Both an IEP and a 504, if taken within different departments at a community college or college, they can receive accommodations at those settings. But again, every setting is different. This is, I know with the colleges we work around in my district, we tell students to take their IEP and their last psycho ed report to the college or community college to see if they can receive any accommodations. And it's not going to be apples to apples from their IEP to the college or community college, but they'll gear it towards what they can provide. Next page. So whole class accommodations for engagement. How can you provide accommodations for this? So this is how to get students involved, motivated to learn. Um, So in one way, you can provide, choice or buy-in within topics, tools, or how they work, solo versus group, setting clear goals, allowing students to track their progress, minimize distractions, and offer flexible learning environments. So an example of this might be preferential seating in an accommodation. So allowing students to sit where they want, not next to a peer where they can socialize, but maybe one student with ADHD or learning difficulty might be better in near point instruction, and say a student with anxiety might be better in far point instruction because they don't want to be in the front of the class and that makes them more anxious. Therefore, they might be more distracted. Every student's different. As a team, collaborate to find out what's the best accommodation for them. Um, Breaking tasks into smaller steps to reduce or overwhelm students. So again, I've seen great teachers not do this for just one student, but for all students, breaking a big project into maybe four smaller ones. And then allowing movement breaks and flexible seating. I've seen within the elementary level, great teachers do this. All the students get a movement break, right? And it's great. They get their wiggles out and then they're able to learn. You can do it 50-10 type of program where you do 50 minutes of learning and then 10 minutes a break and there's been studies that show that that helps with learning. Next page.
Just want to mention real quick, I know a lot of you have a lot of questions, and you also may have a lot of questions about your lived experience with a loved one, yourself, or something else. This session is geared towards some general recommendations, how we work with students in general setting, in in the classroom setting or in other settings. We want to honor privacy and privacy regulations, so it's difficult for us to provide counseling or recommendations for personal situations. I think that that's something, if you'd like to take offline with some of our presenters today, you may feel free to do so.
Thank you, Ruth. I also wanted to mention at the end of the presentation, there's a QR code. If you still want to connect with us, we have our email there, and there's a comment section on the QR code. You can just click on it, and we can give you more advice and toolkit of how we can serve our students better.
Okay, here we have representation. So how's the student receiving the information? Different accommodations can be provided. I see good teachers provide lessons in different modalities. So a presentation, a visual, an audio, playing a clip from a book or playing a video, or just in different formats so students can learn from all angles. Using graphic organizer charts, visual aids. Again, one of the best teachers I've worked with provide strategies and toolkits for the whole entire class in the beginning of the year. Routines are important, having the schedule in the front of the class for all students, and then different, cues. So to get all the students to pay attention. So, teacher claps, all the students clap twice, just to get everyone's attention. As you guys progress in your, teaching journeys or your education, I'm sure they provide with those lessons. Sorry. So, and then, captions, subtitles for videos, transcriptions for audio. That might help with students who, don't do so well auditorily. And then using real world examples and models to illustrate concepts.
Next page, Mr. Onate.
Yes, please.
And I have to apologize. I was trying to reply to a lot of private texts, and my mouse is just have a lot of apologies.
And then another accommodation is how action and expression. We want to allow students to express what they've learned in a way that they can, right? So allowing students to demonstrate knowledge through projects, presentations, writing, or videos. I have some students who might not be the best at orally expressing what they've learned, but they can write it down, or vice versa. We have a student with maybe example with dyslexia or dysgraphia who can't write it down, but they can orally express it. Or some students might be more artistically inclined and they can express it in different ways like that. Allowing text to speech, assistive technology, that's major now. A lot after COVID, there's a move for technology. A lot of students now have Chromebooks. That's been very helpful. So every student should have access or ability to, text to speech or speech to text. That's supportive. And then extended time on tests or chunked work again. A lot of these are repetitive. And again, you mentioned how a student can be supported online. Like you can chunk work online, you can chunk work in person, you can give extended time for projects and assignments, both online and in person. Same thing with the additional time on tests. Every district is different. I know at our district, sometimes we allow students to retake tests. I see students with anxiety do better with that. Even having that accommodation, it makes them less anxious and they don't ever need it. There's different ways you can support students and through online and in person.
Okay, before we move, I have a lot of questions that I received privately, but I wanted to highlight one of the questions because this is also my question when I was teaching. There's a big push for inclusion now. What are some strategies that allow you to be sensitive to the needs of students needing additional accommodation, but at the same time, not taxing the learning experience of the other students? Right? Because you're trying in a gen ed, you're trying to educate all students. And so if you're a new teacher, how do you find the balance of being able to help the students and also provide accommodations to the others?
So I guess that's my major message for the past few slides is providing accommodations to the entire class. You're encompassing the students who are neurodivergent and the students who might not have learning difficulties. Not only does it relieve a bit of struggle and anxiety for the students who have difficulty gets provided to everyone. But also, I feel like for you as a teacher, it lessens your stress of individually providing services because you're providing for the whole classroom. And not only are you supporting all students, but it's also keeping with your obligation legally to implement these accommodations for those students on IEP and 504. Um, I don't know if that
If
answers the question.
I could expand on that, I think what you just said, Jaime, was wonderful. And even these behavior management routines that you're putting right here, if you want to think of accessibility in terms of universal design for learning or inclusive practices, just walk out onto the corner and look at those curb cuts, those curb ramps. They were originally designed as part of the ADA Act for wheelchair accessibilities. But we see many people, mothers with strollers and uh, skateboarders and cyclists, use them to work for them. And so what Jaime just said always reminds me of that visual. That's one of the visuals that I actually use in some of my presentations, that any of these support strategies can be used at any grade level. They can be used in an ECE class, just how, as you as the teacher, can empower yourself to organize them.
Thank you, Ruth. I appreciate that. I learned something today.
I like
Um,
that. I don't know how to skateboard. I'm scared I might break my bone. We have about 6 minutes
okay.
to run through the slides and also have our audience pick which case study do we want to talk about for 30 seconds. But I want to encourage everyone to put their questions if we can answer it during the presentation. Again, we have a QR code that I will be sharing after the presentation.
Okay, behavior management. So we want to be proactive better than reactive. When a student's dysregulated, it's hard to get them back to a regulated state. So we want to be proactive. Again, I'm going to just touch on these very quickly due to the time. Um, but I did do ABA for a couple of years as a therapist and a supervisor. I worked with students on the spectrum. It's very rewarding. Definitely what you see, and again, you see this in all great classes, is providing predictability. It reduces anxiety for all individuals, for all students. So posting the schedule of the day, transitions, routines, again, those strategies, common daily strategies that you might use. A lot of the schools are using PBIS right now um, to implement and practice those positive behaviors, proximity and non verbal cues, so moving near to the student, eye contact, prearranged cues, and then redirect them without disrupting the class is important. And then plan ignoring and private correction. I think that's important. I see that as better within the high school setting or both settings, but a lot of teachers sometimes it's better to not confront the student in the class, to take them aside and with respect in a neutral tone, with empathy again and non-judgment, addressing their behavior, holding them accountable, but asking questions. Why are you acting this way, or why are you doing this, or delving deep. And I'll go over this in the next slide. You have a support system as a teacher as well. Um, but a lot of times, especially when they're younger, a lot of it's attention seeking. I would say please reach out to your school psychologist on how to address this behavior seeking um, behaviors. Um, there's typically plans. If a student has an IEP, they'll have a BIP, a behavior intervention plan. There's also student support plans here at the high school. That one is to address internalized behaviors like anxiety and depression. There's another thing that's also done. It's called a functional behavior assessment to find out what the function of the behavior is within the class. These are all supports and things that can be done to help you as teachers. Um, Next page. So again, to de-escalate behaviors, definitely staying calm, lowering your voice. Individual students definitely read those nonverbal cues, giving a little time, pause time, to address it, and offering choices. Again, buy-in super important. If the student thinks they're making a choice, Even if it's three choices, hey, you can do A, B, or C. That gives them buy-in. And buy-in's super important, especially when it comes to learning. You don't want to be told what to learn, right? Um, and then do avoid arguing or issuing public ultimatums. So especially within, with the class, don't ever touch without permission. Definitely. And then don't punish sensory or anxiety-based behaviors. There's a lot more I can delve into that, and but definitely again, the common theme of trying to approach students in this whole process with compassion, empathy, understanding, patience, curiosity, I think is super important. Next
I
page.
think they're important, and I just said in the in the chat, I can no longer be staying calm. I commend all the new teachers who have the patience and the love for these students, because 5 minutes into my classroom, I know I'll be starting yelling and escalating and getting kicked out. Go ahead for
All right,
the model.
I'll go over this real quick. There's multi-tiered levels of support or models. PBIs might be one, another one's called RTI. The basis of this slide is just to show you guys there's a process into how to see to support students. Ultimately, universal instruction that might be provided to all campus, and then more targeted interventions like pull-out supports for, say, English or math to support students, or behavioral. Right here at the high school, we have something called an MTSSB counselor. You might provide small or individual group. We have counseling, and then ultimately the most intensive tier would be for the student who needs an IEP or a 504 plan. But it's a process, and we do want to get students as early as possible. Like I stated, the student SSTs or step team meetings are very important in these process. And knowing to refer students for. There's a lot of resources that sometimes teachers I find that are not aware of, but definitely reach out. Communication is important to your admin, to your school psych. And trust me, your school psych will be happy if you're asking questions about resources on how to support these students, rather than reaching that tier of like, oh, they need an IEP, they need a 504, because ultimately, and you might hear this a lot, we need to gather data. We need documentation. That's really important for you as teachers, is to document these accommodations that you are implementing. And if you're doing it for a whole class, you can already say that. That's easy. You're doing it for the whole class. That way, that's why I find this more of a simplification on how to support all students and yourself in the teaching process. And then you have that documented, and you get to see if the student does truly need more intensive support. Next page. So before that, I did have a couple of final words. I got 2 minutes. I believe right now, and I heard this I went to the NASP, which is the National Convention for School Psychologists, is that we live in, we're, we're at a time now where experience is highly valued, right? Because the information is readily available for all of us. I get parents now coming in with, using ChatGPT and all this information, but don't know how to apply it, right? So we need experience. Experience will allow you to gain the wisdom on how to apply this information. So you can never be like, I don't know. It's just knowing how to apply this, right? And I had a teacher come in earlier. I tell them, you're not fully gonna know what you're doing for the first 3 to 4 years. You're gonna constantly be questioning yourself, and that's okay. It's gaining those experiences because you have novel experiences. Like, I've never dealt with this, I've never done that. And slowly, as you go in your career, you're gonna gain these experiences. You're gonna feel more confident, and it is gonna become easier. I do want to say is, if you can, especially for those of you at community college or college level, volunteer in a special ed class. Look for mentors who can guide you. Get jobs that work towards your end goal, whatever that may be. Finally, again, I want to emphasize this a lot because it's really important. Compassion, understanding, curiosity, and patience are essential for qualities that allow us to connect more deeply with our students and others, to respond to differences with openness rather than judgment. Cultivating these traits not only supports students and strengthen relationships with people you interact with, but it fosters self-kindness and resilience. So helping to reduce burnout over time, because really good teachers, um, we want you to be good teachers for a long time. It is a team effort, and even though I might, not know you, or as a teacher who works in LA, if I get a student who comes from LA, we're all interconnected. If we all support students, we all, do our best and show all these traits and compassion and support these students, I feel it just overall creates a better culture, climate, environment for everyone. So I do think we're all deeply connected.
Thanks, Mr. Jaime Onate. I stopped sharing my screen because I think we're running out of time, but I wanted to get some sort of a survey. This is what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna share the deck because we have two case study. One is more on workforce, and one is more for K-12 elementary school case study. So based on, if you put on a thumbs up, that means you want more of the workforce answer. Thumbs up if you want workforce, and if it's the funny face, you are from the K-12 case study interested in. So please use the emojis if it's a thumbs up, or the smiley face. Smiley face if it's the K-12. I don't know what it's called.
Or
I know
even,
my daughter will make
yeah,
fun.
or even early childhood. So,
Early childhood.
so smiley face is sort of the educational sort of classroom
Correct.
setting, and thumbs up can be for the workforce.
Workforce.
I think one thing that we could do here is, with regard to the case study around those scenarios, I would imagine that you probably are all thinking of scenarios for yourself. And, oh, thank you, Leah. I was just getting ready to do that, so I appreciate you. So take a look at this, take a screenshot of this, and maybe this can apply in either setting. So we talk about universal design. It looks like there's all sorts of entry levels there. As we wrap up, I don't know if you want to just flash the second case study there, and people can take a screenshot if they'd like. Feel free to do that and see if that works for you in other settings, maybe in a personal setting as well. So you can see how these supports and techniques can apply in a lot of different, oh, someone wants case one. Can we go back to case study one again? Just take a screenshot if you can. It's called the I Told You Already. So I want to just thank everyone, and I'm going to put it in the chat again. Where'd it go? We'd like to hear your thoughts, and if you fill out this form, it also will put you into an opportunity drawing. So it's a survey, it's in the chat, it's a tiny URL. And if you are interested in seeing more of Dr. Saysay tomorrow, if I could just share this QR code. I'm going to go ahead
Do
and
you want me to stop share? Okay, so
Um,
if you click on this QR code that we have on the screen, this is more, we're going to talk about, I'll send you the email of how to approach case study one and case study two. And because we don't have any more time, and we can discuss what Malik, I told you already, or this intern, is he shy, or is he just not professional? So all those things we are ready to unpack, but we ran out of time. I can talk for 5 hours, really, but we don't have that. We don't have that time, but we will connect with you offline. And Ruth, thank you for this opportunity. If you want to hear me talk more tomorrow, there's Bridge to Brilliance at 10 a.m.